In the AWS Developer Podcast this week, we're talking about responsible AI. Good morning, it's Friday morning. Every Friday morning we are in your podcast application with an episode this week recorded live from the AWS Summit in London. You might hear a bit of background noise behind us. It's because we're recording this set of episodes, as you know, since a couple of weeks in the podcast from the Expo floor at the Excel Center in London. My partner in crime for this series of episodes is Tiffany. Thank you for being here all day long. And we don't have one guest, we have two guests today, Christoph and Everton, both from Ryanair, architect and software engineer at Ryanair. My very naive question, and I apologize maybe for the European listeners of the podcast, but what is Ryanair?
Well, Ryanair is the largest European airline, and we're the first, in terms of number of passengers and also market cap as well. So Ryanair was the first European airline to carry 200 million passengers last year, and we have an ambitious goal to carry 300 million passengers in less than 10 years.
Wow, so it's a very ambitious growth objective as well, and maybe that's growth objective that is driven some of the technical change that we are going to talk in this episode. Ryanair decided to adopt generative AI. Why?
Yes, exactly. Gen AI is not a buzzword, but it can also make the lives of people better and can bring productivity and can scale workloads. And that's what we're aiming for. Looking back to our ambitions to grow the number of passengers, we cannot scale people in the same way. So that's why we decided to go, and why not Gen AI can help us, because technology is there. It has been proven that it can bring value. So we are trying to use the value of Gen AI to increase the scalability of Ryanair.
But many companies today are still thinking about what is the use case of generative AI. So you're one step further, you're adopting generative AI. Can you give a couple of examples of use cases where you adopt Gen AI?
Sure. So far, we have identified plenty of use cases across all our departments. So we are working closely with as a central hub, like a center of innovation within Ryanair. So of course, the most obvious ones are related to conversational experience. So as you mentioned,
chat.
Exactly, a chat.
Everybody has to start with a chat.
Exactly. Every airline has its own customer service, right? So it's an obvious one, right? We also have legal departments, marketing, commercials, and so on, right? So our goal is to identify the hottest areas within the organization and assess if Gen AI is fit for purpose, right? So we are now in the phase of collecting all of the potential use cases and prioritizing it, right? So Gen AI is not a silver bullet, it's not a magic wand, right? We've been already automating processes and optimizing them through classical machine learning and programming, right? So it is the journey, and we are just halfway there, right? So we are still looking to the ones that can be tackled with Gen AI. We already have a couple in our minds, and we have a legal department. We have a lot of corporate memory and data we just used for various use cases. We see a potential for Gen AI to help search through this unstructured knowledge bases and provide smarter and faster answers.
So you cited different use cases, both internally and externally, like for your end customers, but also for your processes inside of your own company. How does this work? Like, do you audit? Like, who do you ask questions to? Like, who's making the investigation of where you can use AI, and who's making that report? Like, yeah.
Well, we are the generative AI pod. So we are a center of excellence within Ryanair, where we work across the organization with all the business, with all departments, reaching out to people to understand and listen what are their pain points. So we can use the technology, see where it fits, and then try to solve that problem using generative AI. And in fact, you mentioned that everybody starts with a chatbot. It sounds like chatbot is always the first answer for everything. That's fine. You can start working with chatbot, But we've had breakthroughs. I was thinking about it, and this is something that we innovated within the airline industry. Just last week, we were presenting at Eurocontrol an innovative solution that we used GenAI within our organization, which is a way of classifying, and it's not getting a bit too technical, but classifying a specific type of document that pilots and controllers get on a daily basis. So for every flight, for every airline, there is this particular document called NOTAMs, and there has never been a solution because of the complexity of how things are done. And we managed to combine classical machine learning, standard programming language, and generative AI to come up with a solution, and it has been well received.
That's a really good use case. I mean, it's different than the chatbot. I was joking with the chatbot because everybody's starting there, and maybe that's the idea of GenAI for the non-technical people as well. My mom is using ChatGPT. That's a sign that no, we are. it's a technology available to everybody. But there are challenges with generative AI. The main one is that it's non-deterministic. You don't know exactly what's going to be the output. It can break your reputation. It can induce errors, internal or external errors. We all have in mind the unfortunate adventure from Air Canada, I think it was last year.
Air Canada, every bad example.
I'm sorry, I don't have anything against them, but it was the example in the press everywhere. Where
That's a good example.
I think it was a chatbot that gave incorrect information to a passenger, and they were legally liable against this information. So how do you manage the risk for these solutions that you're introducing at Ryanair?
Yeah, so as you said, the risks are real. It's a tough journey. I believe we have found a way to navigate it properly. So we have established an AI compliance hub, like an organizational-wide institution within Ryanair that gathers together business, technical, legal, and compliance stakeholders. So every project that is approved goes through this process. So everyone at the very beginning can assess, right? So we have a chance to partner with AWS to join one of the programs that help us to assess our assumptions and see where we are and have a full picture of the risk, right? So we found ourselves lacking the responsible AI expertise as the EU AI Act came to enforcement, right?
Yes, because there is also the legal landscape that's keep changing with your European regulation. Can we go into the details of that process? So where does it start? What is the type of input? What are the parts that are taking decision? I guess they are human, but you are using GenAI part of the process as well. And what is the output? So let's follow the data.
I mean, Chris touched on a very important aspect, which is bringing stakeholders and the legal teams. There has been always this complaint within the organization that the legal team especially only knows of the problems after the solutions are already built. And because of the lack of procedures. And this is something that we wanted to avoid. That's why
to include the legal team early on.
So when we joined this program with AWS from the beginning, we wanted to combine everybody, all the decision makers, the stakeholders, so they know what's involved in the application, the legalities, so they know what's at stake, and the security team that actually looks at the security aspects of the applications. For us to know what's happening, we need documentation. We need to establish artifacts so we can prove that, okay, you've been informed, this is the architecture, these are the entry points, these are the data that are involved in the application. So we start with the artifacts, and to have the artifacts, we start with the survey. So this is all part of the framework that we have that we worked with AWS. So you start with a survey, you work with all the parties involved in the projects, all the architects, the teams, the stakeholders, everybody fills in.
So when you say we have a survey, it's a list of questions, like a checklist.
That's a checklist.
Like a pilot, I need to verify this and this and this and this.
And the checklist has been around for so long. Even like doctors, they use checklists to make sure nothing is missing. So we have that checklist now. What are the artifacts that we have? If the artifact is not there, it's already a negative score straight away. that will impact your overall score.
Yeah, the absence of data, it's a sign, it's a flag already.
And then the fact that you have an artifact, it also does not mean that the question is already answered. So the solution will assess the quality, will review the document that's there, and will make sure that it's answer the question. And then if it answers, what is the score? There is a range that...
Wait. First, can you give a couple of examples of questions that you're asking to the different teams, if you have any in your mind?
One of the first questions that comes to my mind is a bit low level, let's say, connected to the software development. So it was about the authentication. How does the authentication looks like within the system, right? So we've been basically not only evaluating the AI component, but it was broader, right? So we are looking at not only the Gen AI tools and guardrails, for example, but also for how the whole system is constructed and secured, right? So the other one that I already mentioned are Gen AI specific components, right? If they are enforced. So basically the whole framework, it relies on the responsible AI pillars, right? The 7-8 pillars that from the well-architected framework, right? So basically, so this service were split into those 7-8 sections, and we have followed. So basically, we have combined this multi-role, let's say, input into while filling the service. We had a chance to fill it together with the AWS team, so it went much smoother than it could be if it was only us completing the forms.
So the output of that process is a list of questions, and then there is a list of response. So next step, you said, is to evaluate the answer. How do you evaluate the answers?
As part of this framework, a bunch of services are built that can assess the quality of the response. For that, there's two main elements that can evaluate the quality, which is one, LLM as a judge. So we are using AI to evaluate AI, and also the human.
That's the best judge you can have.
Exactly. Well,
but we don't scale.
Yeah, unfortunately. And yeah, having AWS by our side on that element was quite important, because we've got specialists, like people that are actually involved in writing the policies and frameworks around the ISO or the Act. So things that we could learn, but would take us a lot of time. So, and then they were all correlated already. So the human evaluation was one part, and also the LLM evaluation was the second part. And then from there, we get a score. And then that score give us an output such as a graph visualization showing areas where we are lacking control or lack responsibility per se, and then that you should be aware of. So for instance, in this particular pillar, you should be more aware. For instance, like Chris mentioned, the technical aspects of the implementation. Is this endpoint encrypted? How is the authentication done? What's the session time? But also all the things outside of that, from the stakeholder perspective, have the stakeholders been trained? Because it's not about developing applications that are secure and responsible, but there has to be an awareness as well from the user side of things. So they should know what to put in and what to expect.
So that's the framework that you put in place right now. Every new Gen AI process or project has to go through that process to get a score, a report. And in that report, I guess it's not black or white. It's not, yes, you can go, or no, you cannot go. There are probably nuances and recommendation. So it's an iterative process as well?
Yeah, that's correct. Like the framework as it was when we engaged with AWS, it was the first phase, which offered a single turn evaluation, right? At the moment, we are looking forward for the framework to be augmented with the platform capabilities, right? So we can build scalable controls, governance framework, and that will allow us to onboard different use cases. That's how we see it, right? The future is that we have continuous evaluation. So every change is done to the application triggers the evaluation, and we see where we are, right? Because how will you know if you mitigated the gaps, right? You have to rerun the whole process. Right now, we can just assume, right, that after implementing the recommendations, we are better in some areas, right? But we don't know
And
how.
ideally, it should be automatic
Exactly.
every time there is a change in a project. How do you onboard the different teams within that process? So you have to knock on every door, every department to say, hey, if there is generative AI, this is the way to go.
Yeah, I would consider ourselves as an evangelist of the technology. And we've been very vocal about the responsible use of generative AI. What are the metrics that we can use? And the legal team especially came aware of the necessity of knowing more, to be more aware of the things because of the AI Act. So that was a big noise for them, especially that it came into force recently. It's still open for adoption. So companies are not getting fined because of that, but it came into force. So that was an opportunity for us to engage with them. And also, as we are building generative AI technologies, we also engaged with the security team saying, hey, guys, we have this framework. This is important. People could be putting things that are sensitive to the chatbots, to the applications. Things could be open in a way that it hasn't ever been opened before. So we should be aware. So that's why we created this compliance hub, and it was well adopted. It was something that made sense for everyone to create this central, because again, just referring to what I said, the legal team always complained, especially around the GDPR, oh, these things happened, but we are not aware. It was already developed. So we wanted to change that, and they were open for this change.
When you identified the needs for like generative AI to be implemented somewhere, are you also the team who's implementing the tool, or is it a team from the department that is involved?
It's both. So we work, like I said, we work as a center of excellence. We work in a way that we want to prove the value of the technology. We want to sell the idea that Gen AI can solve that problem. Once we prove that, we work with product teams to integrate Gen AI into their application. Then we educate the developers as well. So we can, how can I say, we can evangelize developers to develop the application themselves instead of us being in control of everything.
But the framework itself, it's like a living organism. It's changing, it's mutating. You mentioned the AI Act. I think it arrived in February. Before that, it didn't exist. The technology is changing almost every week. Now everybody is talking about MCP client and server. So you have to adopt new technology, new legal frameworks, new internal process on a weekly, monthly basis. How do you refresh the framework?
Oh, it's a tough one, right? Because as you mentioned, the technology is evolving so rapidly that it's hard to keep up, right? Now we have new frontier models being released every week or two, right? And now we are talking about the framework to evaluate how responsible our systems are, right? So at the moment we are quite a small but vibrant team, let's say. We try to also secure some space for us for innovations, right? Because if we got engaged in too many projects, we will lose this opportunity to stay on top of the latest developments, right? So we need to meet in the middle, and we are aware that we won't have time for everything, right? So it's like we are making the calls on the daily basis, right? Where do we put our effort at that week? So it's hard to answer this question, as there is no exactly right. Our goal is to have a trusted autopilot, something that would let us to onboard new AI use cases without growing the team, right? So that's the end goal, right? That's why I refer to the phase 2 of the framework. While we would love to have something already sitting, and whenever we deploy a new use case, most of the things are done automatically, and only some of them are reviewed by humans.
Do you close the loop with the feedback of the project owner as well? And the ones that have been through the framework to say, hey, how we can improve, make it more efficient for them as a customer of yours?
Yeah, definitely. And this, like I said, it is a cyclic procedure. It's not something that you do once and finish.
Mhm.
So it's something that is evolving. And I think, just to follow up on what Chris said, I think everybody's facing the same challenge nowadays because it's such a big race between the frontier models, the providers. Every day is a new thing, and always there's a new buzzword. So how the technology keep up with all these chains on its own is a challenge, because it's a framework that we try to leverage from the partner as much as possible, like AWS, because it's developed in-house. So they will do their best to to accommodate changes from the models as well. So that's one challenge that I believe everybody is facing. So from our perspective, we do our best to communicate the changes, and as soon as possible introduce when it's safe, because you cannot just introduce change in the framework that took so long to educate people. I think the challenging part is not the technical aspect of the framework, but the education. You talk to people, they understand one day and say, oh, and then not everybody is a technical. So
Thank you. That was my next question. What are the... No, you send a couple of applications through that process. Just one or more?
we have onboarded one that is finished. We got the results. Now we are onboarding a second use case that just got launched. And then we passed we call it project card to the AI Compliance Hub. Everybody's aware what's happening. And then we are feeding them now with the artifacts of the results of the application. As we build the application, we give them the artifacts.
And so now that you've been through that process for one complete application and you did the full process, what are the lessons learned? What are you going to change for the next applications?
Well, we definitely learned that we are missing documentation on our applications. So maybe we should have an AI agent that would not only generate but also read the documentation. Yeah, exactly. So we realized that there are some quick wins within the recommendations that we are provided with, right? Since the second use case that Alberto mentioned is based on the same framework, we kind of know, we can predict what will be the recommendations coming from the second round, right? So yeah, it was very insightful for us to have this external assessment evaluation, right? We are Ryanair, right? We operate at a very fast pace, and we are not afraid to fail, right? It's about failing fast and recovering even faster. And so we are really used to this lean startup MVP approach. And that's why, getting the results and seeing this radar chart was something valuable to us, right? But it didn't stop us progressing, right? It told us where we are. It was already added value, right? So we have the areas identified. We know where we want to look at. But as long as it is not, say, critical, or the risks, the identified risks are not showstoppers, we'll progress with more ideas, trying to address these challenges on the way.
Is there anything unexpected during that first run of the process for an application? Did you hit something that, we didn't think about that?
Well, there was some of the evaluations are things that were expected that was a bit confusing to us. And, in reality, it's not only beauty and flowers. We challenged the framework as well because we disagreed with some of the results, right? Do you remember?
It was a kind of reality check for us. We if it would be me scoring myself, I would say, it's 4 out of 5 at every pillar. And then we learned, that it's not all flowers. I believe that the framework is also evolving, right? So it was built for a subset of use cases, right? And we have already called out authentication, right? We have exposed our GenAI component in one of the most secure ways because it was a private API gateway, right? But the framework itself didn't assume this as an option, so we got lower scores under the security pillar. And we were like, okay, so the creator of the framework didn't predict this answer, and that's why it didn't fit into the form. So it was scored 0 instead of exceptional, right? Yeah, exactly. So, but it was great to see that this is the bidirectional way, and we could communicate back to the framework creators what are the challenges and where are the areas that maybe the framework needs some more flexibility, and they were listened, right? So I believe the next iteration of the framework will cover a wider spectrum of use cases.
That's something you can change as well, or it has to go through AWS for changes?
This is something that we've fed as feedback that came actually from our legal team, because all these questions that we mentioned, everything surrounds the survey that you get where you can produce artifacts, but it's not dynamic. Like the questions and the scores you could change. Like the weight for a particular questions you could change, but the question itself could not change because the framework was expecting like a binary answer in the background, something like this. And then the legal team was like, "Oh, I would like to add more questions. Can I?" I was like, "Oh well, not at the moment." Yeah. So would it be amazing if we could add as many questions as we want, define what to expect as an answer, and this will be factored in the results. So hopefully very soon.
So if you're listening to us and wonder what is this, where is this framework in the AWS console, you will not find it. It's not an AWS service. It's an engagement through professional services. So you need to hire professional services, and they can come with a set of artifacts, the methodology, and you guys work with AWS professional services to implement that at Ryanair. Just to clarify, don't start to send me a message saying, where is it in the console? It's not in the console.
We would be open to share as well our lesson learned. If people want to send questions, we would be more than happy to collaborate.
Thank you.
That's not
And
something
yes,
close.
there is the link to your LinkedIn on the on the notes of this podcast,
Yeah,
so people can find you
100%.
super easily. Is there any gap that you identify? I mean, the one application that has been through that framework, it's in production now. Is it behaving like you expect? Is everything going well, or do you notice some gaps between the recommendation of the framework and the reality of the app?
Would you think of gaps, Chris?
Not really. I mean,
No, I think I would agree with your recommendations because, like Chris mentioned, we're working on such a fast pace. Then it's not that we are building technical debt, because I'm pretty sure because we worked with the ProServe, so it was all around the best practice. And then maybe what was lacking was, like Chris mentioned, how we provided the evidences, how we provided the trainings, how we made sure that we were covered with the legalities. So I don't think there were gaps. I think the gaps were actually on our side. And then these details that we just mentioned about a few disagreements with the results.
So it all behaved as expected in the first instance.
Yeah, I think it was as we estimated. The teams estimated something very accurate in terms of effort from our side and their side as well. In terms of, okay, you may be expected X amount of time to answer these questions. The evidence is something that you can gather offline. You may have it, you may not have it. And then in terms of coming back to us with the answers and scores and read out the results, they were also very accurate. So yeah,
It's
kudos on
great.
that.
It means the framework is well designed.
Yeah,
Which
I
is-
think
that's-
people involved were very capable of
Yeah.
understanding the frameworks and everything that was involved. So yeah.
Cool.
yeah, big thanks to Florian,
Florian,
who was leading this exercise with us. He did a great job, and we are more than happy to recommend this framework, this kind of engagement to anyone else who want to learn what is their position within the responsible AI scope.
And you did twice, once in a record session today at the AWS London Summit, and now in the AWS Developers Podcast. What about the future? You say have more application, make it automatic. Can we detail about what are the next steps for you?
Yeah, hopefully we would like to automate this as much as possible. Because at the moment we still have to collaborate with AWS to get the assessments, run we still have the templates, the infrastructure code that was deployed to assess, but the knowledge of the human involved was as part of the engagement. Like Chris mentioned, we would love to have an autopilot because the applications evolve, the models evolve, you add more features, you change models, you change approach. Then we would like to just click a button and say, hey, here is more evidences, just give me a new score.
And the other thing is that one thing is to deliver a responsible service, right? But the other is also to validate it on the battlefield, right? We need to make sure that the system works well for the users from the for the selected use case, right? So this is something that we are learning as we go, right? So I've already mentioned the MVP and lean startup approach, right? So it's a combination of, say, set of scalable controls and then verification if what we have built solves the problem, right? If it fits if it's fit for the purpose. So most likely we will just run these two tracks in parallel to look forward for the framework development and augmentation while still working on different use cases, right? And trying to get as much as we can from its current state. Of course, we've also built a separate, let's say, evaluators to make sure we can handle the dynamic world of LLMs, since we have launched this initiative in the mid 2024 when there is no sign of the Sonnet 3.7 and so on, and we've been already evaluating multiple different models as we go to make sure we are providing the most accurate and the best answers as we can. So this is a combination of the responsible AI framework and our in-house framework developed within the engagement.
You said you're working in a startup mode with an MVP. MVP? Yeah. I'm confused with MCP, which takes all my brain capacity these days. And with MVP, fail fast. How do you balance agility with compliance?
It's tricky. Well, in the world of POC and proving the value, we try to move fast and reduce barriers. And barriers are procedures and compliance regulations, so we try to avoid them as much as possible. Not saying that we don't follow them, but we try to build in a way that they would impact our applications, because they are for a subset of users that would just access that application. When we pass to the point where we proved the value, the users like it, and the project is approved for development, where we work with the product groups, is then when the moment where we will go through the security hub, we will liaise with the security teams, we will make sure that, we got a stamp as best practice and so on, So that's how more or less we try to approach.
It's usually how you build with generative AI at the moment. You do a POC, and you build a bunch of them, and then you test them the hard way, and then you put them to prod, and then it breaks. But yeah, it's hard to know if you're compliant. That's also the thing. When you build something with generative AI, you're at the end of your POC and you've tested a bunch of things, but once you launch it to prod, you're never 100% sure how it's going to behave. But
Yeah, it's as you mentioned, it is a cycle that has to continue to be evaluated, and then navigating the compliances, regulations, restrictions is a tough world, because it slows down innovation at a certain degree. Europe has been in front of putting in practice all these AI acts and restrictions, while the US not so much. And then only recently, there has been, motivation to reduce so we can continue with development and innovation. This is a tough conversation, and that's why we try to stay away from it while we are building and showing the innovation. And then from there, when it's proven, we let two people deal with it in terms of, people who knows it, like the legal team, InfoSec team, to help us with that.
Any advice for our listeners that want to embark on such journey about the things to pay attention? So not necessarily adopting the same framework as you, because as I said, it's not available to all AWS customer, but on the idea of putting a governance hub for generative AI inside an enterprise.
Yeah, governance is something that I personally like working, and I think it's not a nice to have. It has to be something that is embedded in your thought process from the beginning, and it's built around the frameworks that you adopt. So AWS offers some tools out of the box that can help you to assess how your application is doing, such as guardrails, things that can give you metrics to make sure how responsible you are. They are dialed in. You can fine tune how much you can tolerate some certain aspects, hate, toxicity, and other things. So those are the things that has to be considered, from the beginning. So you will thank yourself in the future. your future self will thank you, because these are headaches that you can avoid. That's an opinion. And then also you can make sure your application is safe and compliant, and for sure you avoid problems.
Everton and Chris, architect and senior software architect and senior software engineer from Ryanair. Thank you so much for explaining the details of the journey towards responsible AI at Ryanair. Thank you, Tiffany, for co-hosting this episode with me. Thank you for having listened to this episode until the end. See you next week for another episode in all good podcast application. But now, go build.